Hey everyone, Sharkheart here, and in this video we're going over the 2.8 Abyss. I'll do a guide and showcase in this video. This video is also special for me because I'm going to be using Klee for this Abyss run. Now I know a lot of you don't know this, but Klee was actually my first 5-star character, but she really hasn't seen a lot of action recently. But with the special summer event and her rerun going on right now, I thought it would be fitting to showcase her power in this Abyss. So by the blessing of Dodo King, let's boom boom all the baddies with our favorite explodey child. Now going into floor 11, we can look at the enemies, and let me just say that it's really recommended to bring a pyro damage dealer here, as you'll not only face a bunch of cryo slimes, but you'll also get a sweet 75% pyro damage bonus this entire floor. The second half of floor 11 does have a lot more variation in terms of team composition, but it's also really helpful to use an animo character that can group enemies here, someone like Sucrose, Venti, or Kazuha, because of the third chamber. With that in mind, let's talk a little bit of strategy for each of the chambers. I also want to give you a heads up that I mess up a lot during these runs, and I want you to know you don't have to play perfectly, but you should just have a good strategy in mind, so that way you can complete the floor successfully. Now the first thing to note about this floor is that it is a leyline monolith floor, meaning there's no timer, and that's going to be really important for our strategy overall of making sure we have plenty of energy for the preceding chambers. So to start this floor, you want to run in and hit the slimes immediately, and make sure to take them to one side away from the leyline monolith. If you try to fight all the monsters in the center, some of them will ignore you and continue to damage the monolith, and that's not what you want. Now the next wave of enemies are Hydro and Cryo Specters, so watch out because they can freeze you, but they've also been nerfed so they can be grouped by Animo, and they're a lot less tanky and have a bit less HP, so that's a lot better from what they used to be. Now these specters spawn in all corners of the room, and 2 of them will attack the monolith and 2 of them will attack you. So what you want to do is go by south or southeast, attack the specters in that area first as they will target the monolith, then the other 2 specters will target you, so you'll just get all their attention at once, group them up, and then deal damage so they won't have the monolith as their main target. Once you've beaten all the specters, then 3 Mitochurls with cryo shields will come charging at the monolith. They can do a lot of damage to this, so you want to make sure to hit them, get their attention, then pull them away as soon as you can. But you don't have to go crazy with damage in this phase. Remember, there's no time limit on this part of the Abyss, so take as much time as you need to farm up your energy and get your burst back for the next chamber. Now on to the second half of floor 11-1, we've got a bunch of treasure hoarders to fight. The treasure hoarders all do various things, but the way to think about it simply is just think about the potioneers or ranged treasure hoarders as ones that will target you, and the melee ones are going to target the monolith. So what you want to do is position yourself in such a way that you can fight the melee treasure hoarders and get their attention first, while also diverting the aim of the potioneers and ranged treasure hoarders to fight you and not accidentally hit the monolith while trying to hit you. Now on to floor 11, chamber 2, first half. Now the first wave of enemies is Cryo and Electro Specters, and they are invulnerable to both Cryo and Electro respectively. However, they take plenty of damage from Pyro characters, so make sure to use them. If you do find yourself struggling on this floor, you may want to consider switching up teams and bringing an Animo grouping character to this side. The Spectres love to go all over the arena, they don't stay in one position, and if you hit them they get knocked back pretty far too, so they can be really annoying to fight as a group. But because of the recent changes where they can be grouped, bringing an Animo grouping character like Venti, Kazuha, or Sucrose is really good here as well. So don't feel like you have to use the exact same team on each side of the Abyss. You can change the teams up just to get you the most stars on each chamber. By comparison, the Vishaps you'll face after fighting the Spectres go down a little bit easier because while they do get knocked around, they do tend to group up a little bit better, and their bodies are much bigger, making for bigger hurt boxes. Just be careful to avoid their attacks that steal your energy, and you should be golden. The second half of floor 11-2 will have you fighting a bunch of different Fatuis, and the best thing to do here is figure out which target is best to take out first. And spoilers, I'm going to tell you exactly which ones they are right now. For the first set of 3 Fatui, you want to focus the Hydro one first because it can heal and Hydro shields are a real pain to deal with. After the Hydro Fatui's gone, then you want to focus on the Cryo one because its attacks animations are really long, they home in on you, and they deal a lot of damage. Once you dispatch these 3 Fatui, there will be another set of 3 that spawn, and the first one you want to go for is the Cryo Sisson Mage. It's just honestly the most annoying one to deal with, so make sure to take it down before it gets its shield up and waste a ton of your time. Even though there's a Pyro Enchanted Fatui agent that shoots a homing fireball at you, you definitely want to go for the Cryo Sisson Mage first, because she is the most annoying. And you'll see that I don't exactly do this, but she also doesn't get her shield up, so everything turns out okay. But then again, when you have a character that can create a black hole vortex over your enemy's head, you don't need to think quite as much. And now on to the real pain of Floor 11, Floor 11 Chamber 3. And most of the pain is going to come from the first half of Chamber 3 in Floor 11. It's painful for most characters because this thing never wants to stay still. It's constantly moving and teleporting around the map and you have to chase it down. But it's also painful because you're basically limited to both Pyro or Cryo to deal damage to it. But Cryo is a pretty useless element from the first 2 chambers, so unless you're specifically resetting the Abyss to just get 3 stars on this floor, you don't really want to bring Cryo here. And a good Geo team can take out this boss as well, but just realize that it's going to be a pain to get through the first 2 chambers with a Geo team. However, because the Thunder manifestation is on the first half of Chamber 3, it means that you can reset this chamber over and over in case you get bad RNG, or you just get a bad attack pattern, so you can reset it to make sure you get a good time on this first half. Because honestly, the second half with an Animo grouper is really simple and you don't need a lot of time for that. Just to give you a bit of an idea, if it takes over 2 minutes to down this boss, that's totally fine because you really only need like 40 seconds to maybe a minute for the second half to take it down, and some of you will need even less time. Other than that, there's nothing extremely special to the Thunder manifestation. Just make sure to dodge through some of its attacks or use your elemental burst to give you invulnerability frames so that you don't take damage from certain attacks like the Thunder Wall, Thunder Cage, or some of those attacks. Once you've grounded the Electrobat, it's on to 11-3, second half. Now it's really advantageous in this chamber if you have an Animo grouping character like Sucrose, Kazuha, or Venti, because they will make this so much easier for you. You can swirl their shields all together, which will break all of them, and that makes this so much simpler. But in case you have trouble swirling them all together, you can just run to one side of the arena, eventually they'll follow you, and then you can group them up again. Use your Animo, break their shields. However, if that's not an option for you, Pyro here works really well, especially because the Cryo Abyss Mage is the most annoying one. The Hydro one's bubbles are always terrible, but the Cryo one is Cryo Enchanted, meaning it can put a little ice cage around you that stops you from moving and deals damage if you try to get out. So if you have to beat these individually, I would go Cryo first, then Hydro, then Electro. So just do your best to use these Abyss Mage's elements against them, and this floor should be easy for you. Now that you've conquered floor 11, it's time to move on to floor 12. For chamber 1, we're going to be fighting a lot of Hilichurls and Kairagi and Nobushi. These are also going to be affected by a cryo enhancement, which will massively increase their defenses if we don't clear this aura. And because of that reason, we're going to bring Pyro on both sides. While these chambers are not particularly hard, they definitely are about wasting a lot of time. So we want to bring teams that can make sure to deal the most amount of damage in the shortest window of time possible. While teams that focus on dealing sustained damage can definitely work here, teams that focus on dealing massive amounts of damage in a short burst window seem like they might be a little bit more useful. With that in mind, let's get into each of the floors. For floor 12-1 first half, you're going to be fighting a bunch of tiny enemies, 21 of them in fact. Make sure to use Pyro to break their cryo aura, otherwise they're going to get huge defense boosts. This can be a challenging task because there's just so many tiny little enemies. If you don't have an Animo grouper in this team, it can make it even more painful. But if you don't have an Animo or grouping character, there is a trick you can do to help keep the enemies bunched up a little bit tighter. Simply run to the outside of whatever group you're fighting. Any damage that knocks opponents back will knock them further into the group, and therefore you'll kind of keep everything bunched up. Just picture an imaginary circle where you want all the enemies to be. Anytime an enemy leaves that circle, run around to that side, knock them back in, and then just keep doing that to keep all the enemies in a general area so that you can AoE them down. Once you deal with all the tiny churls, then some big churls will come. At this point, I'd finish off any of these smaller Hilichurls and then take the larger Hilichurls to the edge of the map. The bigger Hilichurls will immediately charge against you, and they'll keep charging over time, but if you keep them at the edge of the map against a wall, they don't have too many options on where they can go, and you can easily burst them down and not have to chase them all over the entire arena. Now on to floor 12, chamber 1, second half. Here we're fighting a bunch of samurai enemy, and they all get an electro infusion explosion aura, which increases their defenses by a ton. You want to break this with either cryo or pyro. Luckily, we've only got 5 enemies to deal with here, so it's a little bit simpler. Because the samurai tend to dash around, you want to be able to group them up simply, and the easiest way to do that is to run to the side of one of them, and they'll kind of all bunch together by themselves. Break them down, AoE their auras, and then you've got 2 Kairagi to deal with. Now, like always, you want to make sure these Kairagi die at basically the same time, otherwise one of them will heal, become invulnerable to any crowd control, and it's just going to be a big time waster and extra pain. Because this is the second half of floor 12, it may be more annoying to try and reset this, especially trying to get energy for the next chamber, so you may want to just take this floor and burst it down as quick as possible, and then reset for floor 12 too, to make sure you have plenty of energy. Because the Abyss rewards only count your best time, not your most recent one, it is totally fine to go ham on one floor and then reset and go for the next one and the next one. Now on to floor 12, chamber 2, first half. The icy rhombus is a little bit annoying to deal with, but there's definitely some things you can do to make this fight a lot easier. The first thing the cryo cube is going to do is run away from you. It's got a couple of attack patterns, but the most annoying one is the wheel. And I've had people tell me that if they get the wheel pattern, they just immediately reset. That is a totally viable strategy, especially because this is the first half of chamber 2, so you don't lose anything by resetting this over and over. However, if you do get the wheel, you can always try to run to the edge of the arena, because sometimes it will just run into the edge and then immediately stop rather than doing its wheel thing 5 or 6 times. When you're about to defeat the boss, it goes into its final form. It puts up a big cryo shield and launches a couple spike balls out and continually recovers health in this phase. You have to launch the spike balls back at the cryo cube to break its shield, but they don't come out instantly, so you can take the time to use a character like Bennett who applies a strong amount of pyro and just tick the shield down a couple hits. Also, don't run too far from the boss during this phase, because it will launch those spike balls at a position that's sort of relative to where your character is, so if you run too far, it's going to be very far away. And another tip is you're supposed to use a charge attack to knock these ice balls back, but you can also use an aim shot with a bow character, but it doesn't need to be a fully charged aim shot. Simply doing a normal aim shot will actually launch the spiky balls right back into the ice cube. Now for the second half of Chamber 2, we're going to be fighting a bunch of Dorito-shaped ruin enemies. There's a little bit of RNG here, so hopefully you don't need to reset, because fighting the cryo cube over and over is a pain, but honestly this floor is pretty simple. However, things can get out of hand if these enemies dash away, so what you want to do is first try and dash towards a Dorito ship. Their attacks are kind of RNG, but these can dash backwards, so you want to dash to one side of them, so in case it does dash backwards, it's sort of still in the area with the other Dorito ships. But once they're grouped, just AoE them down, and the first wave of enemies should go down pretty quickly. After that, there's going to be a big ruin grater, and then a bunch of Dorito snakes that spawn, and probably the easiest way to deal with this is just start attacking the ruin grater first. It has a ton of health, so you want to focus on getting that one down, but if you don't focus on getting it down and you're on the opposite side of the room, it will charge at you and it will be a bad time. Now, the Dorito snakes have an annoying AoE ground attack, but if you can kind of dodge and dance around it a little bit, they'll eventually teleport to you and eventually group themselves up right near the ruin grater so you can AoE everyone down. But sometimes one or both of these ruin snakes just refuse to group up, so if that happens, just try to bring the ruin grater over to at least one of the snakes, and then hopefully the other one will group up near you as well. It can be a real pain, but honestly sometimes it's not worth resetting here, and I would just try to AoE them down and then deal with the straggler at the end, because you might still make it in time. And now we're on to the final part of the Abyss, floor 12, chamber 3. There's definitely a lot more strategy involved with this chamber. The Mirror Maiden on the first half can inflict you with slowing water, meaning that if you get hit with Hydro, your cooldowns become insanely long, so do everything you can to avoid this. It's basically a run killer if you get hit with this. However, characters like Bennett and Jean can apply an element to you and then clear this debuff, so that is something to keep in mind. Now, the Mirror Maiden likes to teleport initially, and the Cryo Gunners like to start off with an attack, so what you can do first is just kind of set things up, wait for the Mirror Maiden to teleport, wait for the Cryo Gunners to start their attacks, and then go to where the Mirror Maiden teleported to. The Cryo Gunners will follow you and you can AoE them down. And while the Mirror Maiden might be the biggest time waster of this domain, I like to work on the Cryo Gunners first. I just really hate that freeze attack, and if you get hit with slowing water and the freeze, oh, just all the pain. I also find the Mirror Maiden's attacks much easier to dodge, whereas the Cryo Gunners have a huge AoE and they can hit you from behind. And if you like this strategy, you can actually run to the south of the arena, wait for the Cryo Gunners to do their little jetpack jump and hop on you, and the Mirror Maiden won't be engaging at first. She's eventually going to come to you, but you can deal a bunch of damage to these Cryo Gunners before she ever gets to you. But if you find the Mirror Maiden just that annoying, you can always deal with her first because the Cryo Fatui Gunners do go down pretty quickly. But also remember that this is the first half of Chamber 3, so you can keep resetting and just getting the attack pattern down in the exact way that you want to make sure that you have plenty of time for the next part. And for the first half of Chamber 3, if you're not clearing it in under a minute and a half, you probably want to reset because the Ruined Snake is also a giant time waster. But once you're able to complete that, we're on to Floor 12, Chamber 3, second half, the final part of this abyss. Here we'll be fighting the Ruin Onyx, and it seems like it's in a total state of confusion because it just does a bunch of random things all the time. It'll first breach the surface from underground, but it may dive underground immediately again. It may just kind of stand there and look at you while you're beating it up. It may just roll around. It's totally random. So there's no set attack pattern, which can make this a little bit more tricky. My best advice is to figure out what attack he's doing and then recognize if it's going to be a longer duration where you can set up your burst, or if he's only going to stay on the surface for a few seconds before diving back underground and becoming invulnerable. Now I know some people might be really intimidated to fight this boss because we don't have the Lumistone Adjuvant to actually use against him, but that doesn't actually matter. You see, when he goes into his big spinny attack state and takes like 90% less damage and is about to launch a bunch of cores at you, there's actually a way to break him and disable him without using the Lumistone Adjuvant. Several cores on the Ruined Serpent's body will start to glow, and if you deal enough damage to these or hit them a certain number of times, then he'll just fall over, become disabled, and become a giant punching bag for you. Now the way to disable these is you can either spam a bunch of aim shots and try to hit them, or you can just hit with a wide sweeping AoE attack that has good vertical as well as horizontal, and that way eventually you can knock him down and sort of disable him. So interestingly enough, even though you want a team for the Ruined Serpent that does really good single target damage, if you have a team that also does a decent amount of AoE damage, then you can make sure that he gets stun locked out of this phase once he starts going into it. However, this fight is a lot of RNG, and unfortunately Abyss has sort of been going this route for a while, but if you use these tips, I'm confident that you guys can conquer the Abyss. But I'd like to know what you guys think. Do you think this Abyss was harder or easier than some of the previous ones we've had? And what do you think a good direction for the Abyss would be? Anyways, that's it for this Abyss guide. I hope these tips helped you. I hope you can conquer the Abyss and get those sweet, sweet primogems. And again, thank you for all the love and support. Thank you for all the likes and subs. Thank you for coming by and saying hi on Twitch. I love you guys. Have a great one. Stay safe. And until next time, may order guide you.